continues. Rare earths, critical minerals, auto industry, and panic. Superpowers meeting in London. Hello and welcome to the Northern Miner Podcast. My name is Adrian Pocobelli. There's an absolute ton to get through today. Before we get into last week's chronology on rare earths, we have Sean Roosen this episode, CEO and founder and executive chairman of Osisko Development, a storied career in the mining industry. Sean shares how he does it, so lots to look forward to there. Now, turning to the rare earths, we got a story last week. Donald Trump on Truth Social, his social network. Our deal with China is done, subject to final approval with President Xi and me. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me. We're getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, a couple of things stood out to me in this tweet. First of all, basically saying the deal is done, it just needs to be approved. Well, I don't know if the deal is done if it needs to be approved. But perhaps that is semantics. The second thing, which is perhaps a little more interesting in some respects, is the line that says, likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including, keyword including, Chinese students using our colleges and universities. In other words, other things were agreed to that we are not mentioning here. So that is from a story on June 11th on mining.com. Then on the same day, we have the Global Times, the Chinese website. Chinese rare earth firm obtains licenses for exports to U.S. and other markets. This is by Yin Yeping at the Global Times. Chinese rare earth conglomerate, JL Mag Rare Earth Co., which I believe is the largest exporter of rare earth magnets in China, said on Wednesday that it had obtained export licenses issued by national authorities for exports to destinations including the U.S., Europe, and Southeast Asia. In response to investors' questions on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange interactive platform regarding the export licenses, JL Mag Rare Earth Co. said that after the introduction of export control measures on medium and heavy rare earth-related items, the company has made export declarations in accordance with relevant national regulations and has obtained export licenses issued by national authorities, Xinhua Finance reported on Wednesday. The export destinations include the U.S., Europe, and Southeast Asia, and the company exports magnetic materials, components, and motor rotors in compliance with laws and regulations according to the report. So some degree of confirmation, we might say, coming from the Global Times. Then we get a little bit more information. It continues. This came after the Chinese Ministry of Commerce said on Saturday that China has approved a certain number of export license applications for rare earth-related items, considering rising global demand for medium and heavy rare earth elements driven by industries such as robotics and new energy vehicles. A Chinese Ministry of Commerce spokesperson emphasized that China's relevant export controls, in line with international practice, aim to better safeguard national security and interests and fulfill international obligations of non-proliferation, which reflects China's commitment to world peace and regional stability. The spokesperson further stated that as a responsible country, China fully considers the legitimate needs and concerns of other nations, and it reviews export license applications for rare earths and related items in line with laws and regulations, has approved a number of compliant applications, and will continue to strengthen the approval process for such applications. So what else can we infer from this Global Times story? It seems to me, first of all, we can conclude that the export controls will remain. These new export restrictions, the need to get a license, will remain and is likely permanent at this point. And why wouldn't it be from the Chinese perspective? The second thing we could infer from this article is that the military contractors and suppliers will continue to not have their orders filled. That is my interpretation of this. China's relevant export controls, in line with international practice, aim to better safeguard national security and interests and fulfill international obligations of non-proliferation, which reflects China's commitment to world peace and regional stability. That seems to be the takeaway. On the same day, We have an article from the Wall Street Journal. China put 6-month limit on its ease of rare earth export licenses. Tentative deal reached in London gives Beijing leverage in trade talks. So, as you see here, the information is quite murky. It's coming from all sides here. You have Trump emphasizing, students at American colleges, the Global Times talking about non-proliferation. Then we have the Wall Street Journal saying a 6-month limit will be placed on these export licenses. And this is by Ling Wei at the Wall Street Journal, an exclusive, by the way. Again, emphasizing the murkiness of this information. China is putting a 6-month limit on rare earth export licenses for U.S. automakers and manufacturers, according to people familiar with the matter, giving Beijing leverage if trade tensions flare up again while adding to uncertainty for American industry. Beijing's agreement to temporarily restore rare earth licenses was one of the key breakthroughs in the latest round of intense trade talks in London. But the 6-month limit illustrated how each side is retaining the tools to easily escalate tensions again. In exchange for the Chinese easing rare earth curbs for now, the people said, U.S. negotiators agreed to relax some recent restrictions on the sale to China of products such as jet engines and related parts, as well as ethane, a byproduct of natural gas and oil drilling important in manufacturing plastics. So here it's for ethane and jet engines and related parts. Details of the framework to uphold an interim agreement forged in Geneva last month are still being worked out, the people said. The White House declined to comment, so that doesn't sound finished, does it? During the London meetings, China agreed to start approving rare earth license applications for U.S. companies right away, pending the sign-off of President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping on the trade framework, according to a person with direct knowledge of the matter. The earliest an application could be approved is within a week of the two leaders officially signing off on the framework originally established in the meetings last month in Geneva, this person said. So, in other words, once both leaders sign off on the deal, the earliest an application could be approved is within a week of the two leaders signing off. The person also noted that as China approves the applications, the U.S. will start to drop its countermeasures, including export controls on the jet engines and ethane. So, again, quite murky here. Then on June 12th, the following day, Chinese foreign minister responds to questions on Trump's claim that China will supply rare earth magnets to U.S. So, seeking clarity, we have the Global Times asking the Chinese foreign minister to provide some clearer information here. And here's the Global Times, asked whether China can confirm U.S. President Donald Trump's claim in a social media post that the U.S. has reached a deal with China and China will supply rare earth magnets and others to the United States. And then check out this word salad that we are given, a whole bunch of words signifying not very much here. This is what they write. Asked whether China can confirm U.S. President Donald Trump's claim in a social media post that the U.S. had reached a deal with China, and China will supply rare earth magnets and others to the United States, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian on Thursday stressed that the China-U.S. trade meeting was held under the strategic guidance of the two heads of state, and the two sides reached a consensus in principle on the framework of measures to implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state in their phone call on June 5th, and consolidate the results of the Geneva economic and trade talks and made new progress in resolving the economic trade concerns of both sides. So all those words basically saying things seem to be going well and we're making progress. And then it says, Lin reiterated that China always honors its commitments with concrete actions. Now that a consensus has been reached, both sides should abide by it. Quote, it is hoped that the U.S. will work with China to implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state during their phone call, give full play to the role of the China-U.S. economic and trade consultation mechanism, enhance consensus, reduce misunderstandings, and strengthen cooperation through communication and dialogue, end quote, Lin said. Now, does that sound like confirmation to you? It sounds like obfuscation, actually, and saying an answer without really answering the question. Then we have a story that same day on June 12th, China to strengthen approval process of rare earth export applications. This is Reuters via mining.com. China will continue to strengthen the examination and approval process for rare earth export applications, a Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson said on Thursday. China is willing to further enhance communication and dialogue on export control with relevant countries and promote the facilitation of compliant trade, ministry spokesperson He Yadong told a regular press conference. So a similar response from the Chinese Commerce Ministry. Then we have a story in the Financial Times, also June 12th. China demands sensitive information for rare earth exports, companies warn. Western companies say China is demanding sensitive business information to secure rare earths and magnets, raising concerns about potential misuse of data and exposure of trade secrets. Beijing's Commerce Ministry is asking for production details and confidential lists of customers as part of its export approval process for critical minerals and magnets, according to multiple companies and official guidelines. Franz Eckardt, chief executive of German magnet maker Magnosphere, said Chinese authorities were asking companies to reveal, quote, confidential information, end quote, about their products and businesses to obtain export approvals. Quote, it's a matter of China getting information officially, rather than trying to steal it, end quote, he said. So concerns about intellectual property theft as a result of the detailed applications that are required when you are submitting to receive rare earths from China. Then the following day, June 13th, Ford CEO says rare earth supply is day-to-day after plant halt. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. So, of course, it's not like the rare earths show up the next day. And in fact, one wonders if they've even started showing up yet here on June 17th. I mean, we haven't really seen that story yet that the rare earths are arriving, have we? So here we are, June 13th. Ford CEO says rare earth supply is day-to-day after plant halt. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Ford Motor Company continues to struggle to obtain rare earth magnet supplies that are essential to car production and have already forced a temporary shutdown of one of its factories. The supply of the critical components has been trickling out of China, which has instituted a new approval process for exports of rare earths that continues to slow supply lines, Ford Chief Executive Officer Jim Farley said. Quote, it's day-to-day, end quote, Farley said in an interview Friday with Bloomberg TV. Quote, we have had to shut down factories. It's hand-to-mouth right now, end quote. Ford idled its Explorer sport utility vehicle factory in Chicago for a week last month due to a shortage of rare earth materials. Farley said he is pleased with the progress he read about from trade talks between the US and China recently, but he has yet to see an improvement in the flow of magnets. Those are used throughout vehicles to power components such as windshield wipers, seats, and audio systems. Quote, we have applications into China's Ministry of Commerce, and they are being approved one at a time, end quote, Farley said. U.S. President Donald Trump said the fresh negotiations with China this week yielded an agreement for Beijing to swiftly approve export licenses for rare earths. Quote, we're educating the administration, we're educating the Chinese leadership about how important these jobs in the Midwest are that are dependent on the supply of rare earth magnets, Farley said. So the Ford CEO, waving a red flag here. If you want to keep these jobs, we need these rare earths. And a related story, this is the Financial Times on June 15th. Car makers battle to find supplies of rare earths as China tightens its grip. So despite the deal, the stories are still coming out of automakers that are struggling. European car makers are in urgent talks with Western suppliers of magnets and rare earths as the sector battles to secure critical materials amid a shortage exacerbated by Chinese export restrictions. Germany's Mercedes-Benz has approached the UK's Rainbow Rare Earths to try to lay claim to the future output from its South African mine, according to one person familiar with the talks. Rainbow, which is backed by TechMet, a mining company part-owned by the U.S. government, only expects to start producing rare earths in 2027 that will end up in permanent magnets. Mercedes declined to comment. Rainbow said it, quote, continues to progress offtake discussions with a variety of industry participants, end quote, including automakers and global trading companies. Frank Eckardt, chief executive of magnet maker Magnosphere, said Porsche and other car makers had asked for additional supplies to avoid a shutdown of production lines in the coming weeks. And you wonder, is this where the other, 10% of the light rare earths are coming from? Quote, everyone started calling and said, can you give us 2,000 magnets because our line is going to stand still? The price is not an issue. Let's talk about what you can do, when we can have it, and how you can do it. It's just unbelievable, Eckardt said. Porsche declined to comment on its suppliers. Eckhard predicted that some car production would be halted by mid-July unless companies could find alternative sources for the magnets. Some companies have been asking Magnosphere, which uses rare earth materials from China to produce its magnets, if it would be able to make them without relying on Chinese supplies, according to Eckhard. Car executives have repeatedly warned that stockpiles of rare earth magnets would last from a couple of weeks to a few months. And interestingly, the FT in this article mentions the delay from the approval of the license to actually receiving your rare earths. Beijing has recently agreed to fast-track approvals for rare earth export licenses for some European companies, following warnings that its new license system for rare earths and related magnets risk causing widespread factory stoppages and disruptions to global supply chains. But industry executives have said that manufacturers may still face delays in receiving their rare earth and magnet shipments because of a backlog of license applications. Even for companies such as Volkswagen, which have already received a license from China, it would still take weeks or even months for the shipments to arrive, they added. Now, meanwhile, BYD takes the EV price war overseas after launching its cheapest car in Europe. So BYD launched the most affordable EV in Europe, the Dolphin Surf, starting at about $25,000 US. It's pretty amazing. The cheapest EV is $25,000 in Europe. So all to say, cars are not cheap, to state the obvious. Now, a whole other angle on this story is Myanmar. And we have an update on China and Myanmar. The timing I found quite interesting. This is Reuters via mining.com. China-backed militia secures control of new rare earth mines in Myanmar. Now, of course, as regular listeners to this show will know, we've been discussing Myanmar at least since December. And the civil war that is happening in Myanmar and this tussle over the control of the rare earth mines. Now, these mines that are being discussed here that the Chinese-backed militia is quote-unquote protecting are in eastern Myanmar. So they're in a bit of a different area. It's not along the Chinese border. Here is the story. A Chinese-backed militia is protecting new rare earth mines in eastern Myanmar, according to 4 people familiar with the matter, as Beijing moves to secure control of the minerals it is wielding as a bargaining chip in its trade war with Washington. China has a near monopoly over the processing of heavy rare earths into magnets that power critical goods like wind turbines, medical devices, and electric vehicles. But Beijing is heavily reliant on Myanmar for the rare earth metals and oxides needed to produce them. The war-torn country was the source of nearly half those imports in the first 4 months of this year, Chinese customs data show. Beijing's access to fresh stockpiles of minerals like dysprosium and terbium has been throttled recently after a major mining belt in Myanmar's north was taken over by an armed group battling the Southeast Asian country's junta, which Beijing supports. Now, in the hillsides of Shan State in eastern Myanmar, Chinese miners are opening new deposits for extraction, according to 2 of the sources, both of whom work at one of the mines. At least 100 people are working day-to-night shifts, excavating hillsides and extracting minerals using chemicals, the sources said. I mean, it sounds like a movie, doesn't it? 2 other residents of the area said they had witnessed trucks carrying material from the mines between the towns of Mong Sat and Mong Yun toward the Chinese border some 200 kilometers away. Reuters identified some of the sites using imagery from commercial satellite providers Planet Labs and Maxar Technologies. So great reporting here by Reuters. Business records across Myanmar are poorly maintained and challenging to access, and Reuters could not independently identify the ownership of the mines. The mines operate under the protection of the United Wa State Army, according to 4 sources, 2 of whom were able to identify the uniforms of the militia members. The UWSA, which is among the biggest armed groups in Shan State, also control one of the world's largest tin mines. It has long-standing commercial and military links with China, according to the U.S. Institute of Peace, a conflict resolution nonprofit. Details of the militia's role and the export route of the rare earths are reported by Reuters for the first time. So fascinating report from Reuters. Now, a whole other strand of this narrative is India's role, which also raises some interesting questions. And here's the headline: India-China tackle rare earth curbs in meeting of top officials. This is on June 13th and is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Indian officials discussed China's rare earth restrictions during talks with the country's vice foreign minister this week, people familiar with the matter said, as automakers continue to warn of a looming shortage that may disrupt output in the South Asian nation. The issue was raised during a meeting on Thursday between Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri and China's Vice Foreign Minister Sun Weidong in New Delhi, the people said, asking not to be identified because the discussions were private. The two sides agreed to hold further talks about critical mineral supplies and broader economic and trade issues, they said. So, China and India discuss rare earths export controls. Then we had this exclusive from Reuters. India moves to conserve its rare earths, seeks halt to Japan exports, sources say. So stopping exports of rare earths to Japan. And this was posted on June 13th, the same day as the story of the discussions between China and India. And here's a story. India has asked state-run miner IREL to suspend a 13-year-old agreement on rare earth exports to Japan and to safeguard supplies for domestic needs, two sources familiar with the matter told Reuters, aiming to reduce India's dependence on China. IREL also wants to develop India's capacity for rare earth processing, which is dominated globally by China and has become a weapon in escalating trade wars. In a recent meeting with auto and other industry executives, Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal asked IREL to stop its exports of rare earths, mainly neodymium, a key material used in magnets for electric vehicle motors, one of the sources said. The Commerce Ministry, IREL, and the Department of Atomic Energy, which oversees IREL, did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The sources declined to be identified because of the sensitivity of the matter. Under a 2012 government agreement, IREL supplies rare earths to Toyotsu Rare Earths India, a unit of Japanese trading house Toyota Tsusho, which processes them to export to Japan when they are used to make magnets. Toyota Tsusho and Toyotsu did not immediately respond to requests for comment, so India is starting to cut off Japan from rare earth exports. And then on the same day, Friday, June 13th, this is a story from CNBC, India moves to tap its rare earth reserves. Experts say it could become an alternative to China. So all sorts of moving parts in this story. Now, there is also, of course, the big story last week that the New York Times put out on samarium. Then we have a story from Reuters on June 15th. U.S.-China trade truce leaves military use rare earth issue unresolved. So as we were discussing at the beginning of the show, military use of rare earths doesn't appear to be on the menu as far as China is concerned. This is Reuters via mining.com. The renewed U.S.-China trade truce struck in London left a key area of export restrictions tied to national security untouched, an unresolved conflict that threatens a more comprehensive deal. Two people briefed on detailed outcomes of the talks told Reuters. Beijing has not committed to grant export clearance for some specialized rare earth magnets that U.S. military suppliers need for fighter jets and missile systems, the people said. The United States maintains export curbs on China's purchases of advanced artificial intelligence chips out of concern that they also have military applications. At talks in London last week, Chinese negotiators appeared to link progress in lifting export controls on military use rare earth magnets with the long-standing U.S. curbs on exports of the most advanced AI chips to China. That marked a new twist in trade talks that began with opioid trafficking, tariff rates, and China's trade surplus, but have since shifted to focus on export controls, as I began last episode. In addition, U.S. officials also signaled that they are looking to extend existing tariffs on China for a further 90 days beyond the August 10th deadline agreed in Geneva last month, both sources said, suggesting a more permanent trade deal between the world's two largest economies is unlikely before then. And here you see in this article that the refined production of heavy rare earths by China is 99%. The rare earth magnets, the refined production is 91%, as stated in this article. So all sorts of drama happening here on the rare earths front. And moving to the Sahel, Barrick has finally heard from the Mali court on its Loulo-Gounkoto mine. This is Bloomberg News. Mali court puts Barrick gold mine under 6 months state control. A Malian court ruled that Barrick Mining's Loulo-Gounkoto gold mining complex should be placed under provisional administration for 6 months, handing control of one of the Canadian company's biggest operations to state-appointed management. The mine will be managed by Soumana Makaji, an accountant and former health minister, said Issa Aguibu Diallo, a judge at the Tribunal de Commerce. And then we have a headline from the Northern Miner, Barrick to appeal Mali's court administrator. And also a headline from Reuters via mining.com, Barrick removes Mali gold complex from 2025 output forecast. So more difficulties for Barrick in Mali. If we take a step back here, I mean, what is the common thread along all of these stories? It appears to me it is resource nationalism. So a wonderful show ahead of us. We have Sean Roosen in depth, a wonderful interview with a true pioneer in the industry. If you want to find us online, you can find us at northernminer.com. You can find us on X at Northern Miner. You can find us on Instagram at The Northern Miner and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where we also host these podcasts, and wherever podcasts are available, including Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, let's turn to the news. Turning to the website, it seems to be the top of the agenda here. G7 works to secure critical minerals in face of China curbs. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. The group of 7 leading economies are working to shore up supplies of critical minerals as they seek to move away from the reliance on China for materials used in everything from mobile phones to wind turbines. G7 leaders aim to agree to a statement at their meeting in Kananaskis, Canada, to establish an action plan to diversify supplies of the vital metals and encourage immediate and scaled investment in projects, according to a draft document obtained by Bloomberg. So it's been coming back the last few weeks, this notion of subsidizing the mining industry. Love it or hate it, it is coming. And as we see here, it could be across the entire G7. Immediate and scaled investment. Without mentioning China, which accounts for almost 70% of the world's production of rare earths, they mentioned the, quote, threat to our economies, end quote, of current practices in the sector. And here's a quote from the draft. Quote, we have shared national and economic security interests which depend on access to resilient critical mineral supply chains governed by market principles, end quote. According to the draft, which is still subject to changes before its adoption by leaders. Quote, non-market policies and practices in the critical minerals sector threaten our ability to acquire many critical minerals, including the rare earth elements needed for magnets that are vital for industrial production, end quote. It continues, quote, we recognize the need to work together to increase investment in responsible critical minerals projects within the G7 and around the world, end quote, the draft document said. Quote, immediate and scaled investment is required to secure future supply chains and ensure promising mining and processing projects overcome barriers such as delays in permitting and approvals processes, market manipulation, and price volatility, end quote. The statement also encouraged multilateral development banks and private sector lenders, quote, to make further capital available for investment in standards-based critical minerals projects, including through innovative financing. End quote. Quite a story. Continuing on, Canada eyes further moves to counter foreign steel dumping. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Canadian Industry Minister Melanie Joly said the government will soon announce measures to clamp down on steel dumping from foreign countries and help domestic manufacturers hit by punishing U.S. tariffs. Quote, we cannot accept any form of unfair practices from different countries when it comes to our Canadian market. That's enough, end quote, she told reporters in Montreal on Wednesday. Quote, we'll make sure to take strong measures to protect our market, end quote. Scrolling down, we have another quote from Joly, quote, we are in conversation as we speak with the steel CEOs and also with the labor movement, adding that Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is looking at most effective measures while avoiding, quote, starting another trade war, end quote. China has imposed a 100% tariff on Canadian canola, along with a smaller duty on pork and seafood imports in response to Canada's tariffs, which also include levies on Chinese electric vehicles. And finally, Joly said, quote, we will make sure that Canadian steel and aluminum is bought through our major infrastructure projects. This is something the industry and also people in the labor sector have been asking for years, end quote. Continuing on, Freeport CEO says tariffs threaten to hinder U.S. copper mining. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. The threat of U.S. levies on copper imports has been a boon for Freeport-McMoRan, with North America's top producer cashing in on selling the metal at a premium. Still, the firm's top boss warns that broader tariffs could hurt an industry President Donald Trump is trying to help. Quote, if global growth is disrupted, that could lead to an impact on copper prices, end quote, Chief Executive Officer Kathleen Quirk said in an interview at Freeport's Phoenix headquarters. She continues, quote, ironically, if we're trying to build up the U.S. copper industry, slowing GDP growth and inflation could put a lot of pressure on mines here, end quote. So Kathleen Quirk, Freeport CEO, showing concerns on tariffs and inflation. Continuing on, flooding at Ivanhoe copper mine was self-induced, study suggests. It's Bloomberg News via mining.com. And it sounds like there could be some pretty serious implications here for Ivanhoe. Seismic activity that disrupted output at a massive copper mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo appears self-induced, according to preliminary findings released by operator Ivanhoe Mines. The incident last month, which flooded parts of the Kamoa-Kakula mine, began in an area where a, quote, mature percentage, end quote, of ore had already been extracted, the company said in a Wednesday filing. Quote, current thinking postulates that blocks of ore earmarked for secondary extraction started to yield in a cascading fashion, which resulted in stress redistribution onto regional pillars, end quote, according to the preliminary geotechnical findings. The setback has cast uncertainty on a project touted as one of the few across the mining world to be built ahead of schedule and on budget. Ivanhoe co-chairman Robert Friedland expressed confidence in the mine's future on Thursday, calling the incident a, quote, bump in the road, end quote. But if studies confirm the disruptions were the result of over-mining, the company may be forced to rethink its plans. The findings' recommendations suggest, quote, a likely reduction, end quote, in total reserves at all the deposits, meaning the company will have to reduce mining rates and spend more, said Bank of Nova Scotia analyst Orest Wowkada in a Thursday note, adding the report indicates the seismic activity, quote, appears self-induced by mining, end quote. The note added, quote, we don't think Kakula is lost by any account, end quote. Still, the findings suggest a revised operating plan for the entire complex that, quote, is likely based on lower mining rates, lower reserves, and higher costs, but still very economic due to grade, end quote. So quite a development there at Ivanhoe. Continuing on, Glencore drives drawdown of Russian copper sanctioned by UK. It's Bloomberg News via mining.com. So the Russian copper that is being taken off of the LME by Glencore is thought to be delivered to China. So you can read the whole article on mining.com. Continuing on, risk of aluminum squeeze grows as key price spread tightens. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. A key aluminum spread that's been the focus of recent intervention by the LME surged into backwardation, signaling the LME market may still be at risk of a squeeze as the main June contract expires next week. The contract traded as much as $10.15 a ton above July on Tuesday, after many weeks during which the spread had been capped at zero or flat. The move is the latest twist in the drama surrounding a giant aluminum bet by Mercuria Energy Group. Bloomberg reported Friday that the trading house, which built up a huge position in the June contract, had been compelled by the LME to lend it to other traders at flat in order to reduce risk to the market. Continuing on, platinum price tumbles as traders reduce risk on Middle East tensions. This is Bloomberg News. So platinum coming down. And just a few headlines here. Tanzania wants large miners to refine and trade 20% of gold locally. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Zimbabwe to ban export of lithium concentrates from 2027, and that is Reuters via mining.com. And we also have a couple of uranium stories on the Northern Miner. Ontario nuclear plan could boost uranium mining. This is by Colin McClellan at the Northern Miner. And Sprott to buy $200 million of uranium for special fund. That is by Frederick Tomesco at northernminer.com. Those are your news stories. Now let's take a look at metal prices. And turning to metal prices, let's take a quick look at the bond market for context. The U.S. 10-year bond is yielding 4.44%. That is 0.02% higher than last week, so slightly higher there. The UK 10-year gilt is yielding 4.54%. That is 0.08% lower than last week. The Italy 10-year bond is yielding 3.49%. That is 0.02% higher than last week. The German 10-year Bund is unchanged at 2.55%. And the Japanese 10-year bond is also unchanged, yielding 1.48%. Turning to precious metals, gold is trading at $3,408.40 per ounce. That is $59 higher than last week. Silver is trading at $36.48 per ounce. That is 19 cents lower than last week. Platinum is trading at $1,242.10 per ounce. That is $28 higher than last week, and palladium is trading at $1,032.50 per ounce. That is $52 lower than last week. Turning to industrial metals, copper is trading at $4.82 per pound. That is 7 cents lower than last week. Iron ore is trading at $95.38 per metric ton. That is 80 cents lower than last week. Aluminum is slightly higher at $1.14 per pound. That is a penny higher than last week. Lead is also slightly higher at 91 cents per pound. That is a penny higher than last week. Nickel drops at $6.83 per pound. That is 15 cents lower than last week. Tin is trading at $14.83 per pound. That is 16 cents higher than last week, and cobalt is slightly lower at $15.12 per pound. That is 17 cents lower than last week. Lithium continues to make a base here at $8.43 per kilogram. That is 4 cents higher than last week. Uranium is trading at $69.75 per pound. That is 75 cents lower than last week, and breaking once again the $70 mark. And zinc is slightly higher at $1.21 per pound. That is a penny higher than last week. Zooming out, really not that much action here other than gold retaking the $3,400 level. Other than that, metals a mixed bag with really not too much drama, probably just general uncertainty with the conflict we're seeing between Israel and Iran. And those are your metal prices. Coming up, I'm very pleased to welcome to the Northern Miner podcast, Sean Roosen, founder, executive chairman, and chief executive officer of Osisko Development. We discuss mining in North America, the company's Cariboo projects, as well as some of the strategies Sean has employed in order to move projects forward and succeed in the mining industry, where he has had indeed a lot of success. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Join us today. I'm very pleased to welcome to the Northern Miner podcast, Sean Roosen, founder, executive chairman, and chief executive officer of Osisko Development. Sean, welcome to the show.
Adrian, always good to be on the Northern Miner.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful to have you, Sean. I mean, what a career. We've talked in London at the International Metals Symposium. It's always just fascinating to talk to you with your history in the mining sector. I guess we had the U.S. election a little over 6 months ago. We had the Canadian election just in the last few weeks. It's quite interesting how mining has risen to the top of the agenda, one could argue, at least critical minerals. How are you feeling overall when you look at, say, mining in North America? I guess there's grounds for optimism, but how do you see things?
Well, I think there is grounds for optimism. I mean, the permitting environment in Canada was somewhat under question. The amount of active investors that were pursuing mining stocks is, sort of come back alive again. And certainly with this refreshed Liberal government, we're hoping that they're going to change course a bit from the previous administration. It looks like they're certainly showing signs of that. We are one of the only permitted mines in North America that are shovel-ready, fully permitted. So we're through the permitting process right now. But any change in regulatory environment in Canada is going to be very welcome. And certainly I think it brings the confidence level up in Canada if the sector can see that there's no ability around the permitting, and that's been a big problem in the past. We got through it. We permitted 5,000 tons a day for our Cariboo gold project in BC. We received that permit in November last year. So we're going into the construction phase at present. So this is the crucial step when we go from paper to underground mining. We're about 1,200 meters in right now. And we think that, the momentum should be building around the exploration and developer space. So hopefully the developers will move first. And certainly we've seen our stock up about 15-20% here recently as we get underway for the construction of what we believe is Canada's next gold mine.
It's not the first time you've done this. So in a sense, what is this stage like? I kind of love how you frame it. In a sense, it's from abstraction to reality to a certain degree. What are the main concerns you have when you make this transition? What do you think about?
Yeah, as you say, I've been here and done this before. We did this during a financial crisis last time. We started in 2008 with a feasibility on Canadian Malartic, which we put into construction in 2009. We commissioned in 2011. And that's become Canada's largest gold mine and the eighth or ninth largest gold mine in the world, depending on who's telling the story. So it's a very intense period, but it's also where value creation occurs. If you look at the traditional Lassonde curve, this is where we come back out of the trough, if you will, and we start to go back up the value chain as risk comes off with every day that you're in construction and more completion is met. And that's really the value building phase we're in right now. And this is a perfect time to be doing it. We've got a gold mine that's making $2,000 an ounce in gross margin US. And the all-in sustaining cost of this mine is about $1,156 an ounce. So if we were in production today, we would be making over $400 million US dollars a year, which is pretty spectacular considering it's only a $650 million US dollar capex. So it's the size of the prize here versus the capital intensity is very good, and the timed execution is not very long either. We'll be in production in 2027 with first full year in 2028. So this is the stuff we all work for. I've been mining since I was 18 years old, started as an underground miner on Kid Creek, Timmins. So this is what I was built for. This is the part I like.
Indeed. And in terms of the costs, I mean, things have changed, I imagine, quite a bit since 2008. What are you seeing on the cost side? Have things plateaued somewhat? Do your eyes kind of bulge out when you see, the costs of things? What is your sense of the costs?
Well, gold price has far outstripped any inflation in our space. We just did our updated feasibility study here at the beginning of May. So our numbers are fresh. We're at about $105 Canadian a ton in terms of mining costs. And right now, it's a 3.6 gram ore body, which is over $500 Canadian a ton. So, we've got gross margin on a per ton basis is the best I've seen. When we built Canadian Malartic, it was a 55,000 ton a day mine. So it was all about throughput. And then, that time we were like 1.03 grams. And we had a gross margin of about $200 an ounce. Now we're at $2,000 an ounce. So it's an incredibly good time to be building this mine in Canada on grid power from a Site C, a big hydroelectric dam in BC, and on a paved road in a town that's been in mining since 1858. So this is the best project that I can see out there right now. You can drive to Quesnel for a Tim Hortons drive-through or a McDonald's drive-through in 45 minutes. I mean, you can actually have pizza delivered out to the mine. So this is good going for where I come from.
And in terms of technology, what's changed since the last time you've done this? Do you feel like it's fairly familiar in terms of how you actually go to build this out? Or do you feel like the tools have significantly changed since the last time you've tried?
We did the evaluation of the project using traditional methods, but we've introduced a couple optimization technologies that are more flexibility than they are. They're nice to haves, not need to haves. One of them is our underground road header, which is often used in civil construction tunneling. But because of our rock hardness in BC, we're able to use a road header, which is all electric. So no diesel power on the main one right now. And that cuts at about 10 to 14 meters a day compared to a traditional jumbo, which averages about 7 to 10 meters a day. So we get a bit more of efficiency per day. We also get the added advantage of a reduced footprint in terms of carbon. And it makes a very nice, smooth tunnel. And it's fully automated. You push a button and mine's 2.5 meters. And then the carrier retracts and it moves forward and does it again. So it reduces the amount of people that are in harm's way during the cycle. And it also you can leave it mining in between shifts when the crew is changing and run it from external. So that's one technology we adopted. The other one is the ore sorter, which has become ever more efficient using an XRT scanner like the one you see at the airport when you put your briefcase through and you can see your keys in the bag. That's what we're using now. We're mostly using that to remove potentially acid-generating sulfides, so it reduces our waste disposal costs. So that's a new one. It's been used in the past in a lot of industries and it's becoming more and more popular. Every major mining company is testing an ore sorter in some way or another right now. So we're going to have two of them at this mine. But as I said, they're more used to optimize the cost of our waste disposal for rock that's been rejected and doesn't go to the comminution circuit. In terms of other technologies around, obviously we've advanced a lot in terms of water management. I like to say this is not your grandfather's mine. This mine will be putting out cleaner water than it takes in. So we will have a net positive effect in terms of our presence in the water in that area, in that basin. And this is an underground mine, so it has a much lower surface footprint than our last mine, which was Canadian Malartic, which was a 5-kilometer long open pit. So everything here is relatively unseeable. So that's it. And it's about 5,000 tons a day. And we hope it goes to 10 to 15,000 tons a day. So quite a bit smaller in scale, but higher in grade. In terms of the use of electricity, obviously we're getting power at 6.6 or 5 cents US a kilowatt hour. So we're using electric wherever we can. Not just because it's cleaner, but also because it's quite a bit more efficient than the cost of diesel.
Very interesting. And in terms of, say, AI and automation, like, are you finding a place for AI, or is it still like pretty initial stages? I mean, I sometimes wonder to myself, like, in a sense, there's benefits to hiring real people in terms of getting the community, say, locals, to sign off on your project. How are you approaching, say, AI and, potential robots and automation?
We're going to have about 600 people total on site for this mining operation, and we hope to expand, maybe double the throughput, and that'll be another 20 or 30% increase in workforce. It's quite an important employer in the region. AI, we use it in our predictive work around geology and exploration. We use it to some extent to automate the underground mining with the road header. It is a bit of a self-learning software, just in terms of optimizing that. And the ore sorter has an AI component to it, as well as self-learning there and optimization of algorithms in terms of how it selects and rejects different types of rocks, what size, what sort of sulfide response and intensity it gets. But the overall project, it's more of an add-on than it is a replacement to anything right now.
What's interesting about when I hear you talk, Shawn, is it seems like you understand the business on a technical level, in a sense, from the bottom up. Do you think that's accurate? And do you think that is what you might consider part of a winning formula to this business? And you probably get this question often. How do you, succeed as to develop a mining company? Do you think it's key to understand things from the bottom up?
Yeah, I think it is. And certainly the success of Osisko has been the fact that we're all technical people. I'm from the Hillbury School of Mines. Bob Ware is one of the co-founders, a well-known geologist from McGill. Don Brzezinski, a well-known geologist from Queens. Chris Loader, a well-known geologist from UBC. And so most of the senior people are all technical people, and we all had the fortune of working for large mining companies and being mentored in those systems as technical people before we became financial and market-looking people. So I've pretty much done every job there is to do on a mining property. So that's to my advantage. I'm very at home and I like operating, as opposed to some of my colleagues who are more financial and a little bit less comfortable with the operating role. So that's my goal is to make this into a producing mining company. Started off at 200,000 ounces a year and then try and get past where we got to last time with Osisko One. When we sold Osisko One, we were producing 670,000 ounces a year. So my goal is to do a little bit better than I did last time. So,
and just in terms of, say, like the entrepreneurial side of this, like, do you think the technical knowledge, is that the most important thing? Like, what other elements might come into the mix for those that are trying to succeed in this business? I guess there's a certain amount of luck, but what else comes into the mix?
certainly asset selection is number one in my book. If you don't know a good asset from a bad asset, the chances of you making a mistake and putting your time and your effort and your shareholders' money to work on a bad asset goes up. The Osisko Group, we've been extraordinarily lucky. We've seen 150 million ounces of discoveries between the senior team. We found and built Canada's largest gold mine at Canadian Malartic. Then we built the fourth largest royalty company in the world. I was the CEO and chairman of Osisko Royalties for 10 years. So we've been able to have what I would call context, and we've done so much due diligence, and we've seen so many assets around the world that we know which one is, for lack of a better metaphor, 2 inches taller than the other one. So when it comes to how do you focus your time, that's the primary ingredient. The second one is being able to communicate that asset to your shareholder base in a way that allows access to capital without over diluting, which is always the challenge. So we've had very good access to capital. As a CEO, I've been responsible for about $3.7 billion in capital raising. That's one of the key ingredients to the cake here, is having access to capital markets. And the third one is execution. You can find a project, you can raise a lot of money, but if it doesn't work when you build it, that is a big problem. We were fortunate when we built Canadian Malartic, it became a 670,000 ounce year producer. And within 12 months of us commissioning that mine, it was the ninth largest gold mine in the world and the largest gold mine in the history of Canada. So we've been to the Stanley Cup and won the Stanley Cup. So we know what winning looks like, and we can feel it when we're on the right asset. And we saw what happened. John led the charge on Windfall Lake. We sold that to Goldfields last year. '03, we sold that to Agnico last year. Bob and John are working on the Gaspé Copper project in Quebec right now. We have the Cariboo Gold project in BC, as well as our Tintic project in Utah. And, we had a pretty good win on OR. We took that from a $500 million market cap to $6.5 billion market cap right now. And it's been one of the more successful companies to come along in the mining space in the last 10 years. So we've had a pretty good track record and a pretty good luck, touch wood, on asset selection.
And just finally on this, like when you look back at, say, Canadian Malartic, do you feel lucky in the sense in the execution? Like, do you feel like you could have screwed that up to a certain degree, or that you made very important decisions where things might have gone off the rails?
I think that with Canadian Malartic, we were pioneering. That was the biggest open pit gold mine in the history of Canada at 55,000 tons a day processing, 300,000 tons a day mining. It was more like a copper mine. And certainly, Detour came 2 years after us. So they got the lessons learned that we learned. But it was very much, uncharted territory for us. The only real analog to that mine was probably Maritau in Uzbekistan and the super pit in Australia. So we were doing something that hadn't been done in Canada before. And we certainly had our share of luck on it. I went and recruited a lot of the Cambior team, and Brian Coates was a crucial add to the team. When Brian joined us back in 2007, having come through the Cambior ranks as a CFO and a financial knowledgeable guy. And with Brian became Luc Lessard, who had been one of the mine builders in Cambior with Louis Gignac. So, we were able to gather up the right people at the right time. So we got lucky in terms of putting together everybody that was kind of at their sweet spot in their career for that asset. And then that's certainly where we feel we are with Cariboo Gold. We've got quite a bit of talent on board with us right now, myself and Chris being the senior players. On the team, Dave Rulo, who's come to join us, who ran the Gibraltar mine, which is 120,000 day copper mine in Williams Lake. So comes from the region. And then Peter Petrowski has joined us, who did all the underground development for New Afton, which is the first successful block cave mine in Canada for gold and copper. So we've got, again, we've gone out, we tried to find the people that were the most likely to succeed, which is, the biggest thing outside of being able to raise money and identify a good asset is human resources and getting the team right. Because if you don't get it right from the top down, you can't get it right from the bottom up. So that's been a key role for me, is to make sure that we got that right selection.
Indeed. And you mentioned Osisko royalties. What is your sense of the royalties business? Like when I started paying attention to, mining stocks, say around 2009, it kind of had a lot of excitement around it and what was called Silver Wheaton at the time. And there was a sense of almost this kind of no-lose proposition where you just get a royalty, but you have none of the risk of the asset itself and all the problems that can happen at a mine. Do you think it's a great business still? Do you think things have changed? What is your sense of that?
I think the royalty business is always going to be a great business, depending on whether you have the right assets or not. It's a very competitive space. You have some clear leaders in the place, Wheaton and Franco, Royal Gold, Osisko Royalties, now OR Royalties. They have a lower cost of capital, and then there's the next level down, which has a higher cost of capital. And the The royalty game streaming space is really about cost of capital from here on in. It's very competitive to find a royalty or streaming deal, and they're more and more used as a form of project capital finance or for capex financing or expansion programs of existing mines. So it remains a good business, and the problem now will be as a shareholder is trying to find value there because most of these things are pretty close to fully valued, if not overvalued.
Very interesting. And so last time we talked, we discussed jurisdiction a little bit, and it seemed like you were pretty excited about the United States. Would you call yourself, in a sense, North America centric in terms of, where you want to develop or where your focus is, or if you're looking for new projects, or would it go beyond that?
I started my career in West Africa in 1987 was the first time I worked international. I was in Africa from 1987 to 2000. So as I like to say, I've been through 5 civil wars and 4 coup d'etats. So that's a younger person's frontier. Very challenging to work without security in the present day and age. And you see what's happening in Mali and some of the other jurisdictions now, where you don't really know if you own your assets or not, or what your tax is going to be. I've stuck to tier 1 jurisdictions really since 2000. It's been much more successful for me than some of my international stuff where we had questionable security issues and questionable tenure issues and permitting and no ability on outcomes. So I'm focused on North America. Bulk of my investments are in Canada. Our project in Utah is an extraordinary jurisdiction. It's ranked #1 by the Fraser Institute. And the knowability on permitting and the stability around regulation, I think, has become pretty much, the big final multiplier on the value of an asset in the space. If you don't know what your permitting requirements are going to be for 10 years in a row, it's very hard for shareholders to value your asset. So that's been good for us. We achieved full permitting in BC in 4 years and 10 months. So the industry average is 14 years, which is one of the big problems that we see with investability of the sector is the knowability and the cost to get a permit. So I feel very fortunate that we've had good jurisdictions. We were in Quebec before that, which at the time was ranked #3, and I think it's still top 10, might be 4th or 5th. And then BC is moving up the ranks. So under the current government, they certainly have set the stage to make it a very important thing. And, to give you a bit of color on that, the NDP got elected with Premier Eby in November of 2024. They split up the Minister of Mines and Minister of Energy into 2 different ministries. And that was done on the election. They formed the government on Monday. They did the cabinet assignments on the Tuesday. And then on the Wednesday, we were on stage with the freshly minted Minister of Mines, and he announced our permit for 5,000 tons a day at the Cariboo Gold Project. So we feel like we have a very pro-mining government to work with, very, very intense on environmental controls and making sure that you have full compliance and that you're bonded and you have a full reclamation program in place. But BC is a great place to do business. And, as we see the world become more and more complicated, I think the North American assets are going to garner a higher premium.
Amazing that you got this in just over 4 years, the permit. I mean, what do you attribute that to? Because what that communicates to me is that maybe the issue isn't so much with the government as with the mining companies. I mean, if you can in fact get it done that quickly, I mean, what are you doing that is, leading to, a fairly positive outcome?
Well, we set the table. We got involved in this project in 2015. So 10 years from the time that we initially invested to the time we filed in 2019, we put out an EA certificate level application, and we were able to achieve the EA certificate in 2023, and then to achieve the final large-scale mining permit in 2024. We're very low footprint. We are in a known brownfield camp. We don't have any greenfield development. And we put our mill back where the old mill was, and we're developing in an area that started underground mining in 1858 and has produced over 4 million ounces, both from underground and from alluvial, and they're active placer mines in our area. So being in a mining jurisdiction with a community that knows mining. The other thing that I would say is that we have very good hosts between Latako, Dane, and Williams Lake, and Zatzel in the Cariboo region. In terms of the social acceptability for this project, we had good endorsement from First Nations on this project as we went through. It's obviously helped us in Victoria in terms of having some help to advocate for this project.
Okay, excellent. And so as we start to wrap up here, Shawn, big picture, what metals are you excited about right now? Like the project in Utah, is that also a gold project? Is that a gold copper project? What other metals are you excited about right now?
Well, in the Cariboo project, it's dominantly gold, but we do have a tungsten deposit we're working on. which was in production during the World War II. That is a strategic metal. And then in Utah, we have a focus on gold in the short term, but there are 23 previous producers on the property. 5 of them were gold mines and 18 of them were silver, lead, zinc mines. And there's also tellurium on this project in the gold deposit. So we have tellurium there. We also have a manganese tailings pond that's quite popular in the U.S. because there's no domestic source of manganese in continental U.S. So we're processing that project right now to see what the actual requirements will be to turn that manganese into something useful for industry, which is mostly to do with the military industry and high-grade steel stuff. The other pursuit we're looking for is a Bingham-style copper gold porphyry. That's the reason that we were there. We were working with the world famous Dr. Silito to identify what we thought could be the next big copper porphyries. There's 2 giant lithocaps here, and we're in the hunt alongside of Ivanhoe Electric to our southwest and Freeport to our south. So everybody is really there for the copper, but this is a polymetallic camp. So fingers crossed, the exploration edge on this one and the game changer could be a couple holes into a good copper gold porphyry that would be analogous to Bingham, which is the largest copper mine in North America. And we're 40 miles away from Bingham in the same age rocks and the same environment. So if there is another Bingham out there, hopefully it'll be on our ground in Utah. And it's quite an interesting place historically. It also started in the 1860s and was mined by Kennecott and then by Rio Tinto and was supplying flux to the big smelter in Salt Lake City at Bingham. So, we are following copper, gold, and some strategic minerals. Within the ODV portfolio, we also have quite a bit of real estate in northern Quebec that we inherited when we bought Virginia Gold. We own all the greenstone belts and exploration stuff up around the center of James Bay and Hudson's Bay. So we have quite a lithium portfolio. The Corvette discovery by Patriot was on one of our properties. So probably about 25 lithium showings there. And we also have Coulon, which is a polymetallic VMS deposit, which is 3.7% copper, about 12 million tons. It sits in our sister company called Electric Elements. So we are in the strategic metals business as well with the land holdings, and we are quite a large land holder. But we're dominantly focused on our Cariboo Gold project at this point in time, and we'll see what happens if the lithium prices come back. But we do have a plan should that occur.
It sounds like you have quite a few projects going on there, Sean. A final question, kind of final thoughts. When we see critical minerals, the supply chain bubble to the top of the, policy-making agenda, do you think that policymakers are getting things right? Is there something that you feel like they should be doing differently? What are your big picture thoughts here as we close?
We are completely underinvested in our mineral resource inventory. The Energy Agency of the U.S. came out and said we need 330 new metal mines to meet the decarbonization program. To put it in context, we have 70 metal mines in Canada, 200 in the U.S. after 200 years of exploration. So now we're supposed to more than double that between now and 2030. It's not going to happen. But certainly we need commodity prices and we need access to capital to be intensified significantly if we're going to get anywhere close to what people are planning. So government needs to wake up and encourage investment into exploration. The easy exploration is complete. Everything that your grandfather would have looked for that sticks out of the ground has been found. The next set of exploration is all blind targets around the world. And the world's a much more complicated place. It does very much matter where you mine these things. As I like to say to the governments, the one thing you have to remember when you're subsidizing technology or anything else, those projects can be moved to California or wherever. So you put your taxpayers' money into a project that's probably going to move. If you invest in resources, they are where they are. And no amount of tariffs will ever move a gold deposit or a copper deposit out of Canada into the U.S. So I'd say focus on our business here at hand in Canada and the U.S. Make sure that we have assets that are going to benefit our grandchildren. And those assets have to be real assets and preferably resource assets that can only go up in value as scarcity increases around the planet. So I think that the government needs to really bear down and focus. We're seeing more and more attention on mining, which I think is a great thing. And there was this fantasy out there for a little while that you could just do ESG without metals. If you want a safe environment, you want to decarbonize, you want to make a cleaner planet, you need mining. The only way forward is with metals. And my message to governments is get out your checkbooks because we have to drill a lot.
Fascinating. And just a follow-up on that, what form does that take? We saw in the Financial Times, there's an opinion piece just last week on saying, the taboo against subsidies, we're past that point now. We subsidize technology anyway, or at least the chip makers. Do you think ultimately, is that where we're at here? In effect, do we need subsidies for exploration?
Well, in exploration in Canada, we have the flow-through share model, which encourages private investment into the highly risky aspect of exploration. And we need more models like the flow-through share, where, if you invest in an exploration company, for every dollar you invest, you get to reduce the dollar from your taxable income. So people are still at risk, but they're being incentivized to pay less taxes in Canada. That's a big incentive because we have a 54% maximum tax rate in this country. So, most people in Canada aren't working for themselves until probably late August or September. By the time you add up to all the taxes that they're exposed to between their income taxes and their capital gains taxes, their property taxes, their gasoline taxes, and their VAT taxes. So some more that has to be direct drive to go into the higher end. Exploration should be referred to as R&D. Everybody loves to finance R&D in the government, and they should be thinking of exploration as R&D.
Shawn Rosen, founder, executive chairman, and CEO of Osisko Development. Thank you for joining us and sharing your fascinating thoughts on this week's Northern Miner podcast.
Thank you, Adrian. We're ODV on the New York Stock Exchange and on the TSX. Please give us a call if there's anything that came up during these discussions that we can follow up on. And certainly, as you may have noticed, I do love to talk about mining at length. So.
Thank you once again to our featured guest, Sean Roosen, for appearing on this week's Northern Miner podcast. And thank you, dear listener, for continuing to support the program. If you want to help out the podcast, please leave us a review in the Apple Podcast directory, share it with your friends, and until next week, take care.